Very rarely are drugs given as a single drug by a psychiatrist. A lot of times they're given by what is called polypharmacy, or more than one drug. Let's hear this psychiatrist talk about that.
You know, I've never been successful finding a cocktail of medicines. My peers were talking to me about their cocktails. Oh, I got this 7-drug cocktail and the person's perfect. Every time I started adding in drugs like that, it made everybody worse. I never really had much success with the cocktail concept. But sometimes I think they're a little bit like, people go from one psychiatrist to the next because their insurance changes. They don't stay with the same person all that long anymore. And sometimes I think it's like, you go to the new psychiatrist and he puts you on his drug. It's like the dog marking his trail. Okay, you're going to be on my drug now. Office are on a perfectly fine.
Now, what's interesting about that is when I was on Seroquel, when I was put on Seroquel, it was in an inpatient facility, and I was put on it for clinical depression. Everyone was on Seroquel that was that guy's patient, regardless of what their mental health issue was, bipolar, schizophrenia, etc. I was put on it for clinical depression. Other people were put on it for bipolar. Other people were put on it for different forms of psychosis, etc., etc., etc. But the problem is, it's not helping the issue. And just because, like he's saying, the psychiatrist is kind of marking his territory, this is my drug.
Okay, you're going to be on my drug now. But they do it. I mean, if someone comes into the office, they're on a perfectly fine medication, they like the way it is, and the doctor says, well, we're going to change you. Why would you do that?
And given what we know about withdrawal, isn't that dangerous?
I would bet that most doctors don't take that into consideration.
So this is about deadly drug combinations, not noted by a coroner here.
Movie star, and you work very hard, but you have pain in your back, so you get tramadol for the pain in your back. Now, tramadol is metabolized into morphine. Mm-hmm. Now, then you get, so you start taking the tramadol, and it's metabolized into morphine, so your back pain is less, but you have a bit trouble sleeping. And then the doctor says, well, I have this great pill that will help you sleep. And they come up with the SSRIs. Here we go, the Zoloft or the Prozac or whatever. Mm-hmm. And now what happens is that Zoloft inhibits the metabolism of tramadol. Mm-hmm. And Zoloft also has a side effect that it makes many men impotent. Mm-hmm. So here you are taking this medication and you're this good-looking movie star, and now you suddenly cannot enjoy all the pretty girls that come after you. Yeah. So what do? You stop with the SSRI, because if you look it up, you say, oh, here I get sexual problems, so it's going to be away with the SSRI. But what happened in your body is that the metabolism from tramadol to morphine has stopped. Mm. But you're still taking the tramadol because your back still hurts. So the tramadol goes higher, mm-hmm. because you were on the SSRI, and suddenly you stop the SSRI. What happens?
Oh, well, then you have this huge dose of morphine in your system.
And what happens if you have an overdose of morphine?
Well, you can die.
Yes. And what does the coroner say? Drug overdose. And then we say, stupid actors, they shouldn't take all these drugs. No, it's an accident.
Now, I'm a big believer that people need to look into the physical causes of mental and emotional illness, and this guy's going to explain that.
Health. And we cannot expect to feel good unless those building blocks and foundations are there. And what we are observing, society as a whole, especially American society, we are getting more and more sick. And if you're physically sick, you're going to be mentally unwell. Right. So when I start to talk about, I want to open up the conversation about mental health. The way it is right now is restricted and limited. Yeah. So I believe in certain things that are necessary for my well-being, that I do myself, and I think that are necessary for the well-being of others. I started my psychology career as a psychologist, research and treatment of eating disorders. So you see the psychiatric consequences of nutrient deprivation right there. And, if you're working with an underweight anorexic client, they will exhibit all different kinds of psychiatric symptoms, from obsessive compulsive disorder to depressed mood, high anxiety, panic, and so forth. And just the act of restoring their weight with food resolves the condition, right? So we know that human beings, when they are deprived of nutrients, exercise, movement, sun exposure, and are provided foods that are inflammatory, disease creating.
So as you can see, what he's explaining is keeping people in psychiatric prisons, psychiatric wards, causes mental illness, obviously.
Symptoms from obsessive compulsive disorder to depressed mood, high anxiety, panic, and so forth. And just the act of restoring their weight with food resolves the condition, right? Yeah. So we know that human beings, when they are deprived of nutrients, exercise, movement, sun exposure.
So this is why you want to look into the 8 laws of health. The Power 9. Okay, so the 8 laws of health are from the Seventh-day Adventists. The Power 9 is from the Blue Zones. You should be looking into these things.
And are provided foods that are inflammatory, disease creating, and you're nutrient deficient because of those. There are psychiatric symptoms that exist, and I experience it myself. I experiment myself. So I know that if I'm not meditating, if I'm not exercising, the winter months, the type of foods I eat, they affect me, how I feel, my quality of sleep, my ability to stay focused. And the sun is our life force, from vitamin D levels to boosting immunity to melatonin, regulating sleep. It is our life force. And at different times of the year, you see that people can be very susceptible to like depressive conditions and low mood and so forth. And then the other thing that I think is critically important is sense of purpose and meaning. So if we're talking about foundations of health, I don't know how you live well in this life unless you have a purpose and you have a meaning that's attached to everything you do, whether that's being a parent or in the work that you do, or it's through service. So if those things are not there, the idea of trying to find it somewhere else to me doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
Diagnostic and Statistical Manual produced by the American Psychiatric Association, 60% of the people on those committees were in the pay of drug companies, designing the Bible of mental health around the world. And in terms of Myers, schizophrenia and psychosis, every single member of the committee was in the pay of the drug companies, one way or another. So it's a very, very powerful influence. Mm-hmm. And the drug companies don't waste their money. They know how to spend money to influence all of us, and what they try to do, of course, is to make us believe that our distress is an illness that requires a biological explanation and a biological fix. That's their job. Can't blame them, really. Their job is to maximize profit for their shareholders. Right. Who I do blame is the professional psychiatry, who has basically forgotten how to maintain an ethical professional boundary between itself and the pharmaceutical industry.
Now, people have been told they've had a chemical imbalance. A lot of times it's serotonin, that's why you're depressed, blah, blah, blah. Here a doctor is going to debunk that myth.
The hypothesis of depression, despite the fact it's been widely publicized and been the basis of many recommendations to patients to take antidepressants. I'm quite sure that many people have been told, that they have a chemical imbalance, or they might have a chemical imbalance, and this drug is being prescribed to put it right. Despite that, there really is no evidence that there are serotonin abnormalities in people with depression. There are studies that show indications of lowered serotonin activity. There are as many, if not more, studies that show indications of increased serotonin activity in people with depression, and studies that show no difference between people with depression and people without depression in terms of serotonin activity. So overall, there's really no evidence that there's an abnormality of serotonin in depression.
Now, this is about the so-called long-term benefits of psychiatric drugs. Let's see. Remember, the Hippocratic Oath at first says, do no harm.
I'm a clinical pharmacologist, and I've practiced medicine for over 40 years. My specialty is prescription drugs, and I've studied these. For the last 25 years, I've had the benefit of being part of the Therapeutics Initiative, which is out of University of British Columbia. And because of that, we had a group of dedicated people who were able to carefully look at the evidence of that led for these drugs to get on the market. So I'm highly aware of what the evidence is, and it's not possible for anybody else to have the time, because it takes hundreds of hours to go through one drug and really find out. But when you see the evidence, I was, and I'm sure you'd be shocked at the fact that these drugs are on the market, because the evidence for benefit is so small. And if you were in a trial and you saw these trials, you would want to be on the placebo group, because the placebo group does almost as well as the drug group, and there's no harms. But more importantly, there aren't any
So take note, the placebo group basically does as well as the drug group, but you don't get any harm.
long-term trials to know whether the benefits outweigh the harms.
No long-term
And a lot of my career, I worked in hypertension, and I did have some satisfaction in treating hypertension, because we did have long-term trials, 5 years, some longer trials, where we looked at the drug versus placebo, and we knew that the drugs decreased strokes and heart attacks and mortality. And so there is a sense.
So as you can see, treating physical illness such as hypertension works. Treating mental illness doesn't seem to.
With people with moderate to severe hypertension, where taking drugs long-term has been proven to be beneficial. But none of the psychiatric drugs have been studied in that way. And if there was a trial, if it magically became available 5 years from now, or even came out now, and it showed that the drugs had the benefit.
Now, what's humorous about that, I was put on a beta blocker, and my therapist at the time, not the last therapist, goes, "Oh, so you will take medication?" And I said, "I'll take medication that works. I will not take medication for things that do not exist."
Outweigh the harms, then I would change my mind. But I actually believe that if those trials were done, the harms would significantly outweigh the benefits. And so just think of how much harm we could be causing in the population. And that's really what Robert Whitaker has brought to to the fore in that since we've had drugs, psychiatric drugs, there's an epidemic of mental health disability in the United States and in North America. And so if the drugs are so effective, why would that be occurring, right? So it suggests that the drugs are causing this.
Exactly.
And that's really scary, right? But so in the United States and in North America. And so if the drugs are so effective, why would that be occurring, right? So it suggests that the drugs are causing this. And so if the drugs are so effective, why would that be occurring, right? So it suggests that the drugs are causing this.
Now, anybody with a long-standing mental health issue might want to ask themselves, where would they be if they were never put on medication?
And that's really scary, right? But so anyway, I think that's the main thing. I don't take any drugs myself.
The use of benzodiazepine has increased tremendously over the years. And because...
Now, what's important to note about this, I was told by a family doctor that I needed benzodiazepines, Xanax to be exact, because of my heart palpitations and high blood pressure and all that, which was later found to probably be due to the Seroquel that I had been put on that destroyed my nervous system and caused autonomic dysfunction. Now, when I went to a cardiologist, the cardiologist explained to me if I had taken Xanax, I would have most likely had a stroke due to how high my blood pressure was. It wouldn't have done anything for the blood pressure, whereas the beta blocker did help with the blood pressure.
The medical profession is so used to them at this point, they're almost taking them for granted. A lot of doctors have forgotten about the side effects and the possible dangers of these medications. If anybody bothers to read the package insert of these medications, they were all meant for short-term use. None of them were ever meant for long-term use. But everybody knows somebody who's been taking benzodiazepine for years. It's incumbent upon doctors to actually take a step back when it comes to benzodiazepine and realize what they're prescribing. Because as I said before, they've been around for such a long time that doctors at this point take them for granted. Said, oh, they're safe. There hasn't been any problem with them. They've been prescribed for 30, 40 years now. And that's not true. So far, of all of the people that have been on benzodiazepine in the 34 years that I've been in pharmacy, I believe 2, possibly 3 have actually come off them. There are people who have been on benzodiazepine for years and years and years, and coming off them is not easy. I actually had a person that took her 3.5 months to come off it, and she was on less than 1/4 milligram. The smallest dose is 0.5 milligram. She was taking 1/4 tablet every 3 days, and when she didn't take that 1/4 tablet every 3 days, she experienced withdrawal symptoms. And what I see is, especially after talking to the patient, is that it's very easy for doctors, and by doctors, I'm not just talking about psychiatrists, I'm talking about doctors in general, for you to come into the office and you complain of anxiety, and they're familiar with lorazepam, so they just prescribe lorazepam as opposed to doing what is recommended by their profession, which is before you prescribe a medication like this, you evaluate the patient and then you send them to a psychiatrist. And then the psychiatrist is supposed to do the right thing and prescribe these medications. However, a psychiatrist, not to make any excuses for psychiatrists also caught in this dilemma because they have to bill for their time. The amount of money that they get reimbursed for seeing a particular patient has gotten smaller and smaller. So they have to see more patients today than they did several years ago. So it's just a lot easier for them to write a lorazepam or benzodiazepine or any other medication than to actually spend time with that patient. So it all really goes back to the insurance companies. That their reimbursement every year, which I'm not saying anything that I think I can get in trouble for. It's easily proven. Every year, their reimbursement is decreased, be it Medicare, Medicaid, private insurance. It doesn't matter what the insurance is. I haven't come across a situation where a doctor tells me, oh, this insurance company has increased my reimbursement on this year. So if the reimbursement is getting less, something's got to give. And the only thing they can give is patient care. So the only way they can make ends meet, and that's exactly what a lot of them have to do, they have to make ends meet, is by seeing many more patients. And whenever you see many more patients, it's inevitable for patient care to suffer. No matter how well-intended the doctor is. You could be the best doctor in the world, you have the greatest intention, but if you're seeing 30, 40 patients a day, as opposed to 10 patients a day, patient care has got to suffer. The law requires us to give a person a minimum amount of information. That minimal amount of information is usually not enough because it's a cookie.
Ask yourself if you've been given this minimal amount of information, and you probably haven't.
That type of information, where it's the same basically for everybody who's taking the same medication. So what I try to do, and what my other pharmacist here tries to do, Carmen, is inform the patient as much as possible. In order for us to do that, you actually have to take time out and find out what medication the patient is using, why they're using it, find out oftentimes what food they're using, and we try to give them as much information of that particular medication as possible, because our goal here is to inform the patient so that the patient can be an active participant in their therapy and not just, as I like to say, a guinea pig in it, because as I said before, the doctors don't have any time to actually get all this information from the doctor, so that they just give you medication A, B, C, D. It's up to the pharmacist, who is really the gatekeeper for the medication. It's up to the pharmacist to find out what the medications are, see if there's any potential drug interaction, go back to the doctor, and then tell the patient all the information that they need so they can make an informed decision. And it's very difficult to do, but it's something that has to be done. Here, I'm able to do that because I'm in an independent pharmacy. There's no possible way at this point in my life I'm going to get rich from doing this. So I make an effort, and I think we succeed in giving the people information, as opposed to other pharmacies where they're doing 300 or 400 prescriptions a day. And it goes back to the same thing as a doctor. If you're doing 300 or 400 prescriptions a day, as opposed to doing 100, something's got to suffer. And what suffer again is patient care. And you cannot give patient care unless you inform the patient. The only way the patient is going to get better is if they're well informed.